The worst day of my life was the day my wife looked me in the eyes and said, "I don't want to be with you anymore. You're not the man I want." Those words shattered me. My name is Max, and I'm 42 years old. Years earlier, I was a successful businessman. I came from a good family, owned a thriving company, and lived alone in a large house. Although I had money, my life was quiet and lonely. A young woman named Priya worked as my housekeeper. She came from a poor family but was hardworking, kind, and always took excellent care of my home. She cooked my meals, kept everything organized, and treated me with respect. If she worked late, her parents trusted that she would be safe at my house. One evening, I hosted a large business party at my home. I asked Priya to help prepare and serve dinner for the guests. There was a lot of alcohol that night, and I became heavily intoxicated. The next morning, we both deeply regretted what had happened between us. Feeling responsible, I told Priya that I would marry her because I believed it was the right thing to do. We got married, and I promised myself I would give her a better life. One day, I asked her what her biggest dream was. She smiled and said, "I've always wanted to become a college professor." I supported her completely. I paid for her education, encouraged her through every challenge, and celebrated when she finally achieved her dream. Watching her succeed made me genuinely happy. Unfortunately, my own life began falling apart. One of my business partners betrayed me, disappeared with a large amount of company money, and left me drowning in debt. My business struggled, creditors called every day, and I spent countless nights wondering how I would survive. As money became tighter, I occasionally asked Priya for financial help. At first, she agreed. But over time, her attitude changed. She became distant, cold, and constantly criticized me. The woman who once stood beside me slowly disappeared. One afternoon, I returned home unexpectedly after a job interview. As I walked into my bedroom, I discovered that she was having an affair with another man. My wife stood in front of me with a suitcase in her hand and said 6 words that destroyed my entire world. "I don't love you anymore. I'm leaving." At that moment, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. The woman I had loved, trusted, and sacrificed everything for was walking away without even looking back. What hurt the most wasn't that she was leaving. It was when she chose to leave, right after I had lost almost everything I had worked my entire life to build. She thought I would never recover. She thought my story was over. She was wrong. Hi, my name is Max, and I'm 42 years old. This is the story of how I went from having everything to losing it all, and how the woman who abandoned me came back years later asking for a second chance. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, stay with me until the end because this story has an ending you won't forget. It all started several years earlier. Back then, life couldn't have been better. I owned a successful logistics company in Chicago. I had spent nearly 20 years building it from nothing. When I first started, it was just me, an old pickup truck, and a tiny rented warehouse. I worked every day, including weekends and holidays, because I believed success wasn't something you inherited, it was something you earned. Slowly, my business grew. I hired employees, signed contracts with larger companies, and before long, I was making more money than I had ever imagined. I bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood. I drove a nice car. I traveled for business. People looked at my life and assumed I had everything. But there was one thing money couldn't buy: someone to come home to. Most nights, the house felt painfully quiet. The only person I saw every day besides my employees was the woman who helped take care of my home. Her name was Priya. She simply smiled and said, "Tonight is important for you. I just want everything to go well." The celebration lasted late into the night. People kept handing me drinks. Champagne. Whiskey. Wine. Normally, I rarely drank more than a glass or two. But everyone wanted to celebrate. Everyone wanted another toast. Eventually, everything became blurry. I barely remember saying goodbye to the guests. The next morning, I woke up with the worst headache of my life. The room felt strangely quiet. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed Priya sitting in a chair near the window. She was crying. My heart immediately sank. Neither of us knew what to say. It became painfully clear that something had happened between us while I was heavily intoxicated. I felt sick to my stomach. I apologized over and over again. "I'm so sorry," I kept saying. "This never should have happened." She wiped away her tears but said very little. For several days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. No matter how many times I replayed that night in my head, I knew one thing for certain. I felt responsible. I didn't want her future to be defined by one terrible mistake. A week later, I asked if we could talk. She quietly sat across from me at the dining room table. I took a deep breath. "Priya," I said, "I care about you, and I don't want this moment to ruin either of our lives. If you're willing, I'd like us to get married." She looked surprised. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then tears filled her eyes again. Finally, she nodded. "Yes." A few months later, we had a small wedding surrounded by close family and friends. As I watched her walk toward me in her white dress, I truly believed we were beginning a beautiful new chapter together. I had no idea that one day, the very woman I was promising to protect would become the person who would break my heart the most. The first few years of our marriage were some of the happiest of my life. Every morning, we had breakfast together before I left for work. Every evening, we'd sit on the back porch, talking about our future. For the first time in years, my house finally felt like a home. One night, while we were having dinner, I asked Priya a simple question. "If money wasn't an issue, what would you do with your life?" She smiled. "I've always dreamed of becoming a college professor." There wasn't a second of hesitation. "Then let's make that dream come true," I replied. At first, she laughed because she thought I was joking. But I wasn't. The following week, I helped her enroll in college. I paid her tuition, bought every textbook she needed, and even purchased a laptop so she could study from home. She worked incredibly hard. Many nights, I found her asleep at the dining room table with books spread everywhere. I'd quietly place a blanket over her shoulders and make her a cup of coffee before heading to bed. Whenever she felt like giving up, I reminded her why she started. "You can do this," I'd tell her. "I believe in you." Years passed. She graduated near the top of her class. I had never been prouder. When she received an offer to teach at a respected college, I surprised her with flowers and took her to her favorite restaurant to celebrate. She hugged me tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Hearing those words made every sacrifice worthwhile. I truly believe we were building a future together. But while her career was rising, mine was about to collapse. It started with someone I trusted more than almost anyone else. My business partner, Daniel. We had worked together for nearly 10 years. He was practically family. I trusted him with company finances, contracts, and major investments. I never imagined he would betray me. One Monday morning, I arrived at the office expecting an ordinary workday. Instead, my accountant rushed into my office looking terrified. "Max, we have a serious problem." Several company accounts had been emptied. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were gone. Daniel had disappeared. His phone was disconnected. His house was empty. He had vanished overnight, along with a huge portion of the company's money. The police opened an investigation, but recovering the money seemed impossible. Within weeks, everything began falling apart. Clients canceled contracts. Banks demanded payments. Creditors called constantly. Employees I cared about had to be laid off because I simply couldn't afford payroll anymore. Every decision felt like choosing which part of my dream had to die first. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating properly. Every morning I woke up wondering how much worse things could get. To make matters harder, I had to sell many of the things I'd spent years working for. First went my vacation cabin. Then my luxury car. Eventually, I even refinanced my house just to keep the business alive. I refused to quit. But every month felt like another battle I was losing. During that difficult time, Priya's life looked completely different. She loved her new career. She was respected by her students. She attended academic conferences and made new friends. At first, she supported me. She would ask how my day went and encourage me to stay hopeful. But slowly, something changed. She became distant. Instead of eating dinner together, she stayed late at work. Instead of asking how I was doing, she spent more and more time on her phone. The laughter we once shared disappeared. The house that once felt warm slowly became cold and silent. One evening, after paying another overdue bill, I quietly asked her, "Could you help me cover a few household expenses this month? Things are really tight right now." She looked annoyed. "I've already worked hard for my money, Max." "I know," I replied softly. "I'm only asking until I get back on my feet." She sighed. "I can't keep supporting both of us." Her words hurt. Not because of the money, but because I'd spent years helping her chase her dreams without ever expecting anything in return. I told myself she was simply stressed. I wanted to believe our marriage could survive this difficult season. I had no idea the worst betrayal was still waiting for me. And I was about to discover it in the most heartbreaking way possible. A few weeks after that conversation, something inside me started to feel different. Priya wasn't just distant anymore. She had become a completely different person. She started coming home late almost every night, always with a different excuse. There was a faculty meeting. I had papers to grade. I went out with some coworkers. At first, I believed her. After all, I trusted my wife. I never imagined she would betray me. But then the little things started adding up. She suddenly changed the password on her phone. She smiled at text messages but turned the screen away whenever I walked into the room. She began dressing differently, wearing expensive clothes and perfume she'd never worn before. One evening I asked, "Is everything okay between us?" Without even looking at me, she replied, "You're imagining things." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. A few days later, I left home early for what was supposed to be a job interview. Since my company was barely surviving, I was willing to take any work I could find to pay the bills. Halfway there, I realized I'd forgotten an important folder containing my resume and financial documents. Frustrated, I turned the car around and drove back home. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a black SUV parked outside. I didn't recognize it. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor, I thought. I unlocked the front door as quietly as I could. The house was unusually silent. Then I heard laughter. It was coming from upstairs. My heart started pounding. Slowly, I walked toward our bedroom. The door wasn't completely closed. I gently pushed it open. And in that single moment, my entire world fell apart. Priya was in our bedroom with another man. The room instantly went silent. They both turned and stared at me. No one said a word. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt as if every sacrifice I had ever made for her flashed before my eyes. The college tuition. The late nights encouraging her to study. The years of love, trust, and support. All of it meant nothing. The other man quickly grabbed his jacket and rushed past me without saying a single word. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I was too heartbroken to do anything. Priya stood there silently. Finally, I asked one question. "How long?" She looked away. "For a while." Those 3 words hurt more than anything else. I nodded slowly. Then I asked another question. "Do you love him?" After several seconds, she quietly answered, "Yes." There was nothing left to say. I walked downstairs, sat alone in the living room, and stared out the window for what felt like hours. That evening, she finally came downstairs carrying a suitcase. She looked completely calm. No tears. No guilt. No regret. Then she looked at me and said the 6 words that destroyed my entire world. "I don't love you anymore. I'm leaving." I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked quietly, "So that's it?" She nodded. "You've lost your business. You're drowning in debt. I can't spend the rest of my life waiting for you to fix everything." Then she added words I'll never forget. "You have nothing left to offer me." Every part of me wanted to scream. To ask how she could forget everything we'd been through. How she could forget the man who had believed in her before anyone else did. But I realized something. You can't force someone to love you. And you can't make someone stay. So instead I stood up, opened the front door, and calmly said, "If this is what you truly want, then go." She picked up her suitcase. Without looking back, she walked out of my life. The divorce was finalized a few months later. She moved in with the man she'd chosen over me. Meanwhile, I was left with debt, a struggling business, and a broken heart. Every room in the house reminded me of the life we had built together. Some nights, I questioned whether I'd ever recover. But eventually, I made a decision. I could spend the rest of my life feeling sorry for myself. Or I could rebuild. I chose to rebuild. I had no idea that life was about to give me an opportunity one never saw coming. And years later, the woman who walked away from me would be standing at my door again. Only this time, everything had changed. The morning after Priya left, I woke up in a house that no longer felt like home. The silence was unbearable. Her coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter. A framed wedding photo still hung in the hallway. For a moment, I just stood there staring at it. Then I took it off the wall, placed it in a box, and carried on with my day. Not because I had stopped loving her, but because I knew I had to stop living in the past. The next year was the hardest year of my life. There were days when I questioned everything. I lost friends who disappeared when my business failed. I sold my luxury car. I downsized to a small apartment. Some nights, I survived on instant noodles because I couldn't justify spending money on anything else. I took consulting jobs, drove for a delivery company on weekends, and accepted any honest work I could find. My pride had been shattered. But one thing never changed. I refused to quit. Every dollar I earned went toward paying off debt. Every spare hour was spent learning new skills, meeting potential clients, and rebuilding my reputation. Little by little, people began trusting me again. One former client gave me a small contract. I treated it like it was worth $1 million. That client referred another. Then another. Within 3 years, my new logistics company was growing faster than the first one ever had. This time, I did things differently. I never gave one person complete control over the finances. Every major decision required multiple approvals. The betrayal I had experienced taught me lessons no business school ever could. By the 5th year, my company had offices in 3 states. We employed over 100 people. Industry magazines recognized us as one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the region. Ironically, I had become more successful than I had ever been before. But success wasn't the biggest change. I had changed. Money no longer defined me. Neither did heartbreak. I finally understood that peace is worth far more than revenge. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Mr. Carter," she said, "there's a woman here asking to see you. I don't have an appointment. She says you know her." "Who is it?" She hesitated. "It's Priya." For a few seconds, I simply stared at the window. 5 years. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in 5 years. Part of me wanted to tell my assistant to send her away. Instead, I quietly said, "Let her in." The woman who walked into my office barely resembled the confident person who had left me. She looked exhausted. The expensive clothes were gone. Her smile had disappeared. She held an old purse tightly in her hands, almost as if she were afraid someone would take it away. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Hi, Max." I nodded politely. "What can I do for you?" She lowered her eyes. "I owe you an apology." I remained silent. She took a deep breath. "After I left you, everything eventually fell apart." She explained that the man she'd left me for wasn't who she thought he was. Within a year, He had cheated on her with someone else and ended their relationship. Not long afterward, the college where she worked launched an investigation into several professors accused of selling exam materials to students. She insisted she had made terrible decisions under pressure and accepted responsibility for her actions. The investigation cost her everything. She lost her teaching license. Her career ended overnight. For years, she struggled to find stable work. Then she looked directly into my eyes. "I finally understand how much I hurt you." Tears rolled down her face. "I was selfish. I cared more about money and success than loyalty. You believed in me when no one else did, and I threw it all away." She paused before quietly asking, "I know I don't deserve another chance, but is there any way we could start over?" Her words filled the room with silence. 5 years earlier, I would have done anything to hear those words. But not anymore. The man sitting behind that desk wasn't the same man she had left. He had learned that love without trust cannot survive. And some chapters are meant to stay closed. I looked at her calmly. "Priya, I forgave you a long time ago." Hope appeared in her eyes. Then I continued. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we can go back." Her expression slowly changed. "I wish you healing," I said. "I truly hope you rebuild your life. Everyone deserves the chance to become a better person." I stood and walked toward the office door. "But that future won't include me." She quietly wiped away her tears. "I understand." As she reached the door, she turned around one last time. "I'm sorry for everything." I nodded. "So am I." She walked away. This time, I didn't watch her leave with sadness. I watched her leave with peace. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's building a life so full of purpose and happiness that you no longer need revenge at all. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Never judge your worth by the people who walk away from you. The right people stay when life gets hard. The wrong people leave the moment the money disappears. And one day, when you've rebuilt yourself, you'll realize you didn't lose the wrong person. They lost you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my place?